What if I told you that telling a child they are smart is actually the absolute fastest psychological shortcut to turning them into a liar?
I mean, it sounds completely insane.
You're right. It really does. Like, everything in our culture basically tells us that we build people up by praising their inherent gifts,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, exactly. You tell a kid they're a genius so they feel like a genius.
Right. But today, we are pulling apart Dr. Carol S. Dweck's groundbreaking psychological framework from her book, Mindset. And we're looking at why the very things we think create success are actually the blueprints for total self-destruction.
It is deeply, deeply counterintuitive. Because, well, we have this cultural obsession with the natural.
Right, absolutely.
The person who just effortlessly achieves greatness without breaking a sweat. And what this research reveals is that by worshiping that effortless perfection, we are inadvertently setting a massive trap for ourselves and for the people we care about.
Yeah. So to really understand the trap, I want you, the listener, to just picture a scenario for a second. Imagine you've just had one of those days where the universe feels like it's just completely out to get you.
Oh, we've all been there.
Right. So you go to a class, or maybe it's a massive quarterly review at work, something you really care about, and you get a thoroughly mediocre evaluation, like a C+ or a needs improvement.
Ouch. Yeah, that hurts.
You leave feeling totally gutted, and then on the walk to your car, you find a parking ticket jammed under your windshield wiper.
It just keeps getting worse.
Exactly.
Yeah,
You are boiling over with frustration, so you call your best friend to vent, and they're distracted. They sort of just brush you off and get off the phone.
So they're no help at all.
None.
Right.
Now stop and look at your internal monologue in that exact moment. Like, what are you saying to yourself?
And that internal monologue is the key to everything we're exploring today in this deep dive. Because a vast portion of the population will experience that sequence of events and synthesize it into a singular, devastating conclusion. I am a loser.
Wow. Yeah.
They'll think, the world is unfair, nobody cares about me, and I am just fundamentally inadequate.
Right. It feels like a permanent branding, like a tattoo you can't wash off.
Exactly.
But another group of people experiences that exact same C+, that exact same parking ticket, and that exact same brushed off phone call, and their internal monologue is just entirely different.
Yeah, it's night and day.
They think, okay, I need to look at my study habits or my work output, and I definitely need to pay better attention to street signs.
Right, they localize it.
And as for the friend, they just think, my friend must be having a really stressful day for them to be that short with me.
It's practical. It's totally actionable.
And our mission in this deep dive is to really figure out why those two completely different realities exist in the exact same world, and how one invisible belief dictates, well, everything. Our careers, our relationships, and our ability to survive failure.
So the foundational context here actually goes back to a debate that has raged for centuries. Nature versus nurture.
Right, the classic debate. Are you born with your abilities, or do you develop them?
Exactly. And for a long time, the scientific community treated it as a zero-sum game.
Yeah.
It was one or the other.
But that's not really how it works, is it?
No, not at all. The source material highlights the work of neuroscientists like Gilbert Gottlieb, who completely reframe this. It's not an either-or scenario. Genes and environment actually cooperate.
Wait, cooperate how?
Well, genes literally require environmental input to function properly. It's a dynamic system.
Oh, wow. So they need the outside world to even turn on.
Precisely. But what Dweck's research brings to the table is that it's not just the external environment that shapes us. It is our own internal beliefs about our traits that ultimately dictate our reality.
So we are essentially dismantling the myth of the natural today. And to kick us off, I want you to mentally place yourself in one more scenario.
Okay, let's hear it.
You've decided to learn a new language. You are in a classroom. A few sessions in, the instructor calls you to the front of the room and starts just firing questions at you in this new language.
That sounds terrifying for a lot of people.
Right, so pay attention to your stomach. Are you terrified of making a fool of yourself? Or are you energized because you're finally getting to use the words you've been studying?
And that reaction tells you everything.
If you are terrified, you are likely operating in what Dweck calls the fixed mindset.
Yeah. The fixed mindset is the belief that your qualities, your intelligence, your personality, your moral character, they are all carved in stone.
So you're just stuck with what you've got.
Essentially, yes. You are dealt a specific hand of genetic cards at birth, and that is your permanent allocation for the rest of your life.
It's kind of like being in a high-stakes poker game where you're dealt a pair of tens and you just have to spend your entire life bluffing.
That is a great analogy.
Right. You can never ask for new cards. You just have to convince the rest of the table that you're holding a royal flush.
And think about the sheer psychological burden of living that way. I mean, if your traits are permanent and finite, you live in a state of constant, unrelenting evaluation.
Every moment is a test.
Every meeting, every exam, every social interaction is a judgment. It's asking, will I look smart or dumb? Will I be revealed as a winner or a loser?
Because if you fail at a task and your abilities are fixed, then you are a failure. There's no separation between the event and your identity.
Exactly. Conversely, the other framework is the growth mindset.
And this is the belief that your basic qualities are things you can actually cultivate, right? Through your efforts, your strategies, and help from others.
Yes. The hand of cards you're dealt at birth is just the starting point for development. It's not the end of the game.
What's really wild to me is how early this divergence happens. Like, the sources talk about this experiment with 4-year-olds.
Oh, the puzzle experiment. That one is fascinating.
Right. So Dweck and her team brought these really young children into a room and offered them a choice.
And what were the options?
They could either redo an easy jigsaw puzzle that they had already successfully completed, or they could try a harder new one.
Now, I have nieces and nephews, and 4-year-olds are basically chaos engines.
Totally. They're into everything.
You would think they would just naturally gravitate to whatever is new and colorful and exciting.
But they didn't. The kids who had already developed a fixed mindset chose the easy, safe puzzle.
Which is just, it's wild that they already know to do that.
And they explicitly told the researchers things like, kids who are born smart don't do mistakes.
Wow. It is deeply unsettling to hear a 4-year-old articulate that.
It really is.
At 4 years of age, they have already absorbed this toxic message that their primary job in life is to protect their label of being smart.
Yeah, they perceive that their inherent worth is entirely tied to flawless performance, so they actively avoid anything that might expose a flaw.
But the kids with the growth mindset reacted completely differently.
Oh, entirely differently. They thought it was a trick question.
Like, why would you even ask me that?
Exactly. They couldn't understand why anyone would want to do a puzzle they already knew how to solve, so they just grabbed the harder puzzles.
I love that.
One little girl actually shouted, "I'm dying to figure them out."
See, for them, the puzzle wasn't a diagnostic tool measuring their worth. It was just a fun opportunity to stretch their brains.
This divergence, it really forces us to look at the history of how we measure intelligence. Because the fixed mindset is deeply, deeply embedded in our institutional history.
It really is. I mean, consider Alfred Binet, the French psychologist who invented the first practical IQ test back in the early 20th century.
Right, the IQ test.
If you ask most people today what an IQ test does, they will confidently tell you it definitively measures your unchangeable innate intelligence.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, when I was in elementary school, they literally seated us in groups based on our reading and math aptitude scores.
Oh, the reading groups, red birds and blue birds.
Exactly. It was treated like a blood type. You are an A positive, you are a B negative. It was your permanent academic identity.
Which is the great historical irony of all this, because that is the exact opposite of Dinet's original intention.
Wait, really? The exact opposite.
Yes. In the early 1900s, Binet was commissioned by the French government to identify children in the Paris public school system who were falling behind.
Okay, so he made the test to find the struggling kids.
Right. But the purpose of his test was solely to identify these struggling students so that new targeted educational programs could be designed to help them catch up.
Not to just label them and leave them behind.
Exactly. He actually invented what he called mental orthopedics.
Mental orthopedics. That sounds like brain physical therapy.
That's essentially what it was. Exercises designed to increase focus, memory, and cognitive capacity.
So the guy who literally invented the IQ test didn't believe in fixed IQ.
Not at all. Binet wrote fiercely against the idea that intelligence is a fixed quantity. He argued that with practice, training, and method, we can literally become more intelligent than we were before.
That blows my mind. So how did it become this fixed thing?
Well, it was later, when the test was brought to America and adapted by eugenicists and certain psychologists, that it was weaponized into an unchangeable metric of human worth.
Okay, but I have to push back here for a second because this can easily slide into, like, toxic positivity.
That's a fair point.
If Binet and Dweck are right, does a growth mindset mean literally anyone can be Albert Einstein or Ludwig van Beethoven if they just put in the hours?
I see where you're going with this.
Because, look, I took piano lessons for 6 years. I practiced relentlessly. And let me tell you, I peaked at playing intermediate sheet music.
So you hit a wall.
A massive wall. No amount of mindset was going to turn me into Mozart.
Isn't this research just sort of selling false hope?
It's a vital distinction to make, and it's where people often misinterpret the research. A growth mindset does not mean anyone can be anything.
Okay, good.
It does not promise that 10,000 hours of practice will magically turn you into Mozart or Einstein. The core tenet of the growth mindset is much more nuanced than that.
So what does it actually promise?
It states that a person's true potential is unknown and unknowable.
Meaning you just can't see the ceiling from the floor? Exactly. You cannot possibly foresee what years of passion, toil, and specific strategic training can accomplish. You might not become Mozart, but your fixed mindset assumption that you reached your absolute limit at intermediate sheet music is also flawed.
So I probably could have gotten better if I had changed my strategy instead of just deciding I lacked the talent.
Right. The history of exceptional achievement is absolutely littered with people who showed zero early aptitude.
Really? Like who?
Well, Charles Darwin and Leo Tolstoy were considered aggressively ordinary children.
Darwin was ordinary.
Totally unremarkable. Ben Hogan, arguably one of the greatest golfers in the history of the sport, was completely uncoordinated as a kid.
That's wild.
And Cindy Sherman, one of the most important photographers of the 20th century, she actually failed her first photography course.
She failed photography. That is staggering given her influence.
The point the sources make is that the growth mindset doesn't guarantee you will be Cindy Sherman. It guarantees that if you don't stretch, you will absolutely never find out what your actual baseline is.
Which brings up this really fascinating dynamic regarding self-insight that the sources talk about.
The ability to accurately evaluate yourself. Yes.
Right. The research shows that people in general are terrible at estimating their own abilities.
We all have blind spots.
But when researchers segment the data, they find that the people with a fixed mindset account for almost all of the inaccuracy. Like, they drastically inflate their own abilities.
Because their ego completely depends on it. If every task is a referendum on your permanent worth, you have to distort reality just to survive the day.
You magnify your successes and you build these elaborate, crazy excuses for your failures.
Precisely. Distortion is a survival mechanism in the fixed mindset. But people with a growth mindset are remarkably accurate at assessing their own skills.
Why is that?
Well, if you are oriented toward learning, you fundamentally require accurate information about your current abilities.
Oh, that makes sense. You can't fix a problem if you don't acknowledge it exists.
Exactly. You cannot fix a weak backhand in tennis if you're constantly convincing yourself that the sun was in your eyes every single time you miss a shot.
Which means if you view the world through a fixed lens, your definition of success becomes incredibly fragile. You aren't building a real skill set. You are just hoarding validations.
And when those validations inevitably crack because nobody is perfect, the fallout is devastating.
Let's actually look at how these mindsets handle it when things actually go wrong. Going back to our opening vignette, the C+, the parking ticket, the brushed off phone call.
The bad day.
Right. In the fixed mindset, a bad day isn't just a bad day, it's an existential crisis. The failure transitions from an action to identity.
That phrasing is crucial. From an action to an identity. In the growth mindset, you failed. It is a verb. It is an event that occurred in time.
It happened and now it's over.
But in the fixed mindset, you are a failure. It becomes a noun. It is who you are. And the stakes of this cognitive distortion scale up dramatically when we look at high-profile examples.
Let's talk about those. The sources bring up Jim Marshall, the former defensive player for the Minnesota Vikings.
Oh, the wrong way run.
Yes. So he was playing in a high-stakes game against the San Francisco 49ers. He spotted a fumble, scooped up the football, and ran it all the way into the end zone for a touchdown.
A hero moment.
Except the only problem was he had gotten turned around in the chaos. He ran the wrong way.
Oh.
He scored for the opposing team on national television.
I cannot even fathom the physical sensation of realizing what you've just done in a stadium of thousands of people.
Right. That is the kind of nightmare you wake up in a cold sweat about 20 years later.
It was profoundly shameful. But we have to look at what happened during halftime.
What did he do?
Marshall sat in the locker room and made a very conscious choice. He thought, if you make a mistake, you have to make it right.
So he didn't just wallow in it.
No, he thought, I could sit here in my misery, or I could go out and do something about it. He played a brilliant second half and actually helped his team win the game.
That's incredible resilience.
But more importantly, He spent years afterwards speaking to groups, using his most shameful public mistake to help others find courage. He did not let the error define his identity. He used it as data.
And the tragic counterpoint to that in our sources is the story of Bernard Lusso.
That is such a heartbreaking story.
He was one of the top chefs in the entire world. He ran a 3-star Michelin restaurant in Burgundy, France. He had built an absolute empire, cookbooks, frozen food lines, international fame.
He was at the very pinnacle of his industry.
But the culinary world is incredibly high pressure, and his rating dropped slightly in another prominent guidebook, the Gault Millau.
Right. It went from a 19 out of 20 to a 17.
Concurrently, rumors started swirling, and they were just rumors, mind you, that he might lose one of his 3 Michelin stars, and tragically, Lusso took his own life.
It is a profound tragedy that perfectly illustrates the lethal danger of the fixed mindset when it reaches its absolute extreme.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
The director of the Gault Millau later said it was unimaginable that a rating drop could take a man's life. But if you truly understand the fixed mindset, it is entirely imaginable.
Because his identity was the rating.
Yes. Luiso's entire identity was predicated on being a flawless culinary genius. When the external validation wavered, his internal architecture just collapsed.
The lower rating didn't just mean he needed to change his menu. It gave him a new, unbearable definition of himself as a failure.
It is the ultimate, tragic manifestation of what the sources call CEO disease.
CEO disease, right. We see this all the time in the corporate world, where leaders build a fortress around themselves to prevent any negative feedback from penetrating.
Yes, CEO disease is what happens when a leader operating in a fixed mindset refuses to confront their shortcomings and instead engineers an environment where they appear to have none.
So they just surround themselves with yes men.
Exactly. The text uses Lee Iacocca as a prime example of this.
The Chrysler guy.
Right. Iacocca was initially brilliant. He orchestrated the massive turnaround of Chrysler in the 1980s. But once he achieved that exalted status, he essentially reverted to the mentality of that 4-year-old protecting their smart label.
He became obsessed with his own mythology.
Precisely. Instead of continuing to innovate, he surrounded himself with sycophants who would only deliver good news.
So what happened to the company?
He kept churning out the exact same car models with superficial exterior changes because true innovation requires risking failure, and he could no longer tolerate that risk.
Wow.
He isolated himself on the executive floor, demanding to be treated like royalty, while Japanese automakers were completely overhauling how cars were manufactured and basically stealing Chrysler's market share.
He chose a pedestal over a laboratory. He wanted to be a hero rather than a student of a changing market.
That's a great way to put it.
And the contrast provided in the text is Lou Gerstner. When Gerstner was brought in to save IBM in the 1990s, the company was a bloated, dying dinosaur.
It was in terrible shape.
And Wall Street was demanding a quick, flashy, heroic fix, the kind of thing a fixed mindset CEO would immediately attempt.
But Gerstner embraced the growth mindset. He completely ignored the sneers from Wall Street. He didn't try to look like a genius savior.
So what did he do instead?
He did the grueling, deeply unglamorous work of overhauling IBM's stagnant, highly political culture over a period of years.
Just rolling up his sleeves.
Exactly. He dismantled the hierarchical structures that prevented communication and rewarded teamwork over individual grandstanding.
Which brings up a really critical question. How does the fixed mindset cope when a deficit is actually exposed?
Oh, this is where it gets dark.
Because if you fail and you genuinely believe your ability is fixed, you are left with no recipe for success.
None at all.
You can't just try harder because you believe trying harder doesn't change your baseline. So the text outlines this terrifying triad of behaviors: shirk, cheat, blame.
This is where the behavioral data gets really alarming. In a study of 7th graders facing the transition to junior high, researchers asked them what they would do after failing a test.
Okay.
The students with a growth mindset said they would study harder or try a different study strategy. Normal, productive responses.
Sure.
The students with a fixed mindset explicitly said they would study less next time.
Which seems completely irrational until you understand the underlying logic. Like, if you don't have the brains, why waste the effort?
Exactly. But it gets worse. Those same fixed mindset students stated they would seriously consider cheating on the next test.
Cheating.
Yes. In their view, if they don't have the innate intelligence, they still need to secure the grade to protect their label, So cheating is a perfectly logical workaround.
That is so sad.
And if they couldn't cheat, their final strategy was to actively look for peers who scored lower than them in order to repair their self-esteem.
The classic, at least I'm not that guy strategy. Instead of elevating themselves, they scan the room for someone to look down on. And we see the blame aspect of this triad so clearly in the sports world.
Oh, absolutely.
The sources dive into John McEnroe, arguably one of the most physically gifted tennis players to ever hold a racket, but psychologically he was deeply entrenched in a fixed mindset.
He was famous for his temper tantrums.
Right. When McEnroe lost, it was never, ever his fault. He blamed the temperature of the court. He blamed the fact that he ate too close to the match.
He always had an excuse.
There is this wild anecdote where he threw a massive tantrum because the sawdust he used to dry his hands on the court was ground too fine.
Sawdust.
Yes. His agent literally had to pay a union employee to grind up a 2x4 with a sander to create coarser sawdust just to appease him.
His capacity for externalizing blame was endless. His most famous excuse was during the 1984 French Open.
Oh, this one is classic.
He was playing Ivan Lendl, leading 2-0, playing flawlessly, and then he lost.
And his explanation.
An NBC cameraman took off a headset, and a slight noise came from the side of the court.
A slight noise.
That was it. It wasn't his fault. Therefore, he never had to train to improve his concentration or emotional regulation.
It's just wild.
Yeah.
Compare that to Jack Welch, the growth-minded CEO of General Electric. When GE acquired the Wall Street firm Kidder, Peabody, the firm was almost immediately hit with a massive insider trading scandal.
A total PR nightmare.
Welch didn't blame the market, he didn't blame rogue employees, and he didn't throw his subordinates under the bus.
What did he do?
He personally called his top executives to apologize, stating clearly, I blame myself for the disaster.
Yeah.
He took the hit, learned from the oversight and due diligence, and changed their acquisition protocols.
He used it to grow.
Right. It actually makes me think of the movie Groundhog Day. Have you ever analyzed that movie through this lens?
You know, I can't say I have.
Okay, so Bill Murray plays Phil Connors, this incredibly arrogant weatherman who gets stuck in a time loop living the same day over and over.
Right, I remember that.
Initially, he uses his knowledge of the repeating day to construct this fixed mindset fantasy.
Oh, interesting.
He memorizes facts about the townspeople to look like a genius. He tricks a woman into sleeping with him by pretending to share all her interests. He's amassing all this validation without actually growing as a person.
Ah, I see. He is achieving the illusion of perfection without the vulnerability of effort.
Yes, exactly. But it leaves him completely hollow, to the point of utter despair. He only breaks the loop when he fundamentally shifts to a growth mindset.
When he starts actually trying.
Right. He starts using the infinite time to actually learn. He takes piano lessons day after day. He learns ice sculpting.
Though it's worth noting that the movie takes it a step further. It isn't just about self-improvement.
What do you mean?
Well, Phil Connors only escapes the time loop when his effort is directed entirely outward. When he uses his acquired knowledge to catch the boy falling from the tree, to perform the Heimlich maneuver, to genuinely help the people of the town without expecting praise in return.
Oh, wow.
It highlights a critical wrinkle in this research. A growth mindset isn't just about acquiring skills for personal glory. It's about expanding your capacity to engage with the world.
That is a phenomenal point. He stops trying to look perfect and starts actually doing the work. Which brings us to the most paradoxical part of the fixed mindset.
A fear of effort.
Yes. If failure is an existential threat, then the actual act of trying must be terrifying too. Because if you try and you still fail, you're out of excuses.
This is the tragedy of effort in the fixed mindset. Effort is viewed as a giant red flag.
Right, because if you're a genius, you shouldn't have to try.
Exactly. If you are a natural genius, you shouldn't have to sweat. If you have to try hard, it is literal proof that you lack the capacity for greatness.
The text provides a haunting example of this in the story of Nadja Salarno Sonnenberg.
The violin prodigy.
Yeah. She was this renowned violin prodigy. She debuted with the Philadelphia Orchestra at age 10, but when she arrived at the Juilliard School to study with the legendary teacher Dorothy DeLay, she was a mess of terrible habits.
So she wasn't perfectly trained.
No. Her fingerings were awkward, she held the violin incorrectly, but she absolutely refused to change.
Because changing meant struggling.
Exactly. She was the prodigy, and prodigies, by definition, don't struggle. If she tried to learn a new grip and sounded terrible for 3 months, she would lose her identity.
Right. As the other perhaps less naturally gifted students at Juilliard began catching up to her and surpassing her through sheer practice, she suffered a massive crisis of confidence.
It must have been agonizing.
She became terrified of trying. She later admitted, if you go to an audition and don't really try, well, you have an excuse.
Wow.
She took this to such an extreme that she literally stopped bringing her violin to her lessons.
Wait, she stopped bringing her violin to a violin lesson?
Yes.
That is the fixed mindset, just completely paralyzing you. You would rather guarantee failure by not trying than risk failure by giving it your all.
It took an ultimatum from Dorothy DeLay, who essentially threatened to kick her out of Juilliard to break the spell. Nadja finally realized that trying and failing honestly was better than wasting her life protecting an illusion.
Effort robs you of your excuses.
It really does. You can no longer comfortably say, I could have been a great violinist if I really wanted to.
But the vital upside is that effort is the only mechanism that actually ignites true ability.
Which completely dismantles the myth of the lone genius that our society is so utterly obsessed with.
Oh, we love that narrative. Thomas Edison, standing alone in a dark basement, a light bulb suddenly flashing above his head, in a singular eureka moment.
But the truth outlined in the sources is that Edison was practically a corporation.
Let's be real, he had 30 assistants.
Yes, and he operated a state-of-the-art laboratory in Menlo Park, funded by serious capital.
It wasn't just him tinkering in a garage.
Not at all. The light bulb wasn't a single stroke of genius. It was a grueling network of time-consuming inventions requiring chemists, mathematicians, glassblowers, and thousands of failed filament tests.
And Charles Darwin relied on massive collaborative teamwork and half a lifetime of obsessive dedication to synthesize his theories.
Even Mozart, the poster child for natural genius, labored for over 10 years, often patching together chunks of other composers' work before producing his first truly original masterpieces.
We project superhuman, effortless abilities onto our heroes because it lets us off the hook.
That's exactly it.
The great choreographer Twyla Tharp calls this nonsense. She explicitly states there are no natural geniuses.
But society continues to worship effortless perfection anyway.
It's exhausting.
The sources cite a deeply concerning study from Duke University regarding the intense anxiety and depression among female undergraduates.
I remember reading this.
These young women described an immense, crushing pressure to display perfect beauty, perfect social lives, and perfect academic scholarship. And critically, they had to do it all without appearing to break a sweat.
Right, they call it the duck syndrome.
Gliding serenely above the water while paddling furiously and desperately beneath the surface.
The French even have a term for it, savoir-faire, where true cool is achieving the impossible effortlessly.
Which is just a setup for misery.
I have always hated the tortoise and the hare fable for this exact reason.
Really? Why?
Think about it. Nobody reading that story as a kid wanted to be the plodding, boring tortoise.
That's true.
We all wanted to be the hare. We just wanted to be a slightly less lazy version of the hare.
We wanted the natural speed.
Exactly. The fable accidentally gives effort a bad name. It makes it seem like effort is the consolation prize, something reserved for the untalented runts of the litter who have to painfully slog their way to the finish line because they lack natural gifts.
There's a very sharp critique of the fable because it reinforces the exact false dichotomy of the fixed mindset. You either possess innate ability or you must expend effort.
Right, but the growth mindset views effort as the literal engine of ability.
Consider the story of the racehorse Seabiscuit.
Oh, I love this story.
He was a broken, undersized horse with a bad limp, literally destined to be put to sleep. He was managed by a team of severely damaged individuals, a half-blind jockey, an owner who had lost his fortune, and a trainer who was considered a washed-up maverick.
A total ragtag group.
Yet through dogged, relentless determination, they transformed into champions.
And wonderfully, the text notes that Laura Hillenbrand, the author who wrote the definitive book on Seabiscuit, wrote it while suffering from severe, debilitating chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yes. Both the subject of the story and the storyteller triumphed through sheer grit over massive physiological and circumstantial deficiencies.
So if effort and failure are processed this differently, how does it physically play out when the stakes are high? Like when people are thrown into a hyper-competitive environment. Let's look at the pre-med students transitioning to college.
Yes, the gateway course of organic chemistry.
Just saying it makes people sweat.
It is infamous. It is the class designed to weed out the students and decide who actually gets to go to medical school. Researchers followed pre-med students through this grueling semester.
And what did they find?
What they found was that Everybody studied hard, but they studied entirely differently based on their underlying mindset.
The fixed mindset students essentially acted like human vacuum cleaners.
Exactly. They read the textbook, they read their notes, and if the material was dense or confusing, their only strategy was to just read it again.
Just cramming it in.
And when they inevitably took a brutal exam and did poorly, they concluded they just weren't cut out for science. They would throw up their hands and say, "I did everything possible."
But they hadn't done everything possible. They'd only done the passive work. The students with the growth mindset took active control of their learning process.
Yes. Instead of unthinking memorization, they looked for underlying themes.
And we can look at the cognitive mechanics of how they did this. They didn't just reread the textbook. They mapped out the chemical bonds on Ouija boards, forcing their brains to trace the actual pathways of the electrons.
Which is active recall.
Right, which physically builds stronger neural pathways than passive reading. They went over their mistakes relentlessly until they understood the why behind them. They were studying to learn the architecture of chemistry, not just to ace a test.
And critically, they managed their own motivation. Even if the professor was incredibly dry, they found ways to keep themselves engaged with the material.
Because they didn't see the class as a judge handing down a verdict. They saw it as a gym. They were there to work out their brains.
And the fear of evaluation and the fixed mindset starts so young. There's a study in the sources with fifth graders.
Oh, the cardboard box test.
Yes, the researchers showed these kids a closed cardboard box and told them there was a test inside that measured an important school ability.
Just a mysterious box.
Right. And the fixed mindset kids didn't just believe the hidden test measured a current skill level. They actually believed this random test in a cardboard box could measure how smart they would be for the rest of their entire lives.
That is the terrifying logical conclusion of the fixed mindset.
Sure.
A single point in time, a single arbitrary evaluation dictates your permanent trajectory.
We see this play out tragically in adolescence, resulting in what educators call the low effort syndrome.
I heard of this.
When students hit junior high and the academic work suddenly gets much harder, many previously bright students simply stop trying.
Society often writes this off as teenage rebellion or hormonal shifts, right?
Exactly. But psychologically, it is a desperate ego protection strategy.
It's the "you can't fire me, I quit" defense mechanism.
That's perfectly stated. By choosing not to try, they protect themselves from the adults who are evaluating them.
Because if they try their hardest and fail the math test, the verdict is that they are dumb.
Right. But if they don't try at all, they remain an enigmatic underachiever. It's a misguided way of asserting independence, but it permanently paralyzes their potential.
And this psychological vulnerability is severely exacerbated by institutional school tracking systems. A researcher in Germany, Falco Reinberg, conducted a study on teachers' mindsets.
This study is incredible.
He found that teachers operating with a fixed mindset became self-fulfilling prophecies. They kept the high-ability students high and the low-ability students low. The students' trajectories never changed throughout the year because the teacher didn't believe they could.
But the growth mindset teachers didn't just improve the low ability students, they erased the gap entirely.
The gap was just gone.
The low ability students ended up way up high, right alongside the traditionally smart kids.
We see this beautifully illustrated in the famous examples of educators who refuse to accept fixed ceilings, like Jaime Escalante.
Stand and deliver.
Yes. The teacher who taught college-level calculus to inner-city kids at Garfield High in Los Angeles. Kids who had been completely written off by the system as turned off and unteachable. He didn't ask, can they learn? He asked, how will they learn best?
And Marva Collins in Chicago. She took second graders who had failed out of public schools, children who had been clinically labeled retarded or learning disabled, and she treated them like intellectual giants.
She gave them Shakespeare.
By the end of the year, these same second graders were studying Aristotle, Shakespeare, and Tolstoy. 4-year-olds in her school were casually talking about diphthongs and warning each other that without hard work, they'd taken a carrion flight to nowhere.
That is amazing.
It fundamentally proves that when you remove the fixed mindset prejudice from an environment, human potential is staggering.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here again because I can hear people listening and thinking, okay, math, reading, organic chemistry, sure. I can see how effort and active recall strategies teach you academic subjects.
But what about art?
Exactly. What about raw creativity? You either have the gift to draw or you don't. If you ask me to draw a portrait of you right now, it's not going to be art.
It's going to be a stick figure.
It's going to look like a crude schematic diagram. It's going to be an assembly of symbols. Like an almond shape for an eye, a triangle for a nose, rather than a representation of what's actually there.
It's the most common area of pushback, and the source material addresses it beautifully through the work of Betty Edwards, the author of Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain.
I've heard of that book.
We assume drawing is a magical, God-given gift, but Edwards shows that drawing isn't actually a drawing skill at all. It's a seeing skill.
A seeing skill. What does that mean?
Well, people draw those crude schematic diagrams you mentioned because their left brain is dominating. The left brain categorizes things into symbols.
Okay.
To draw realistically, you have to learn to shift to the right hemisphere and actually perceive what is in front of you. You have to learn the component skills of perceiving edges, negative spaces, relationships, angles, and the interplay of lights and shadows.
So it's something you can learn, like riding a bike.
Yes. The sources include before and after self-portraits from a 5-day course she teaches. The before pictures look exactly like the schematic diagrams you described.
And the after pictures.
5 days later, they are stunningly realistic, beautiful, evocative portraits. Everyone can do it once they learn the component skills of seeing.
That is wild.
Even Jackson Pollock, the man who arguably revolutionized modern art, is widely agreed by art historians to have had very little native talent initially.
Wait, Jackson Pollock wasn't a natural talent.
Not at all. His early work was clumsy and derivative, but he was obsessively dedicated. He thought about art constantly, painted constantly, sought out critiques, and mentored his way into greatness.
He outworked everyone.
He got from point A to point B through staggering dedication and a willingness to produce bad art until it became good art, not through a magical birthright.
Which brings us to an incredibly important and frankly uncomfortable pivot in this deep dive. We've talked about how this affects individuals, but what about how we affect each other?
Yes, the interpersonal dynamics.
Because we haven't talked about relationships yet. How does the fixed mindset operate when you are dealing with a romantic partner or a best friend?
The divergence in how the two mindsets approach relationships is profound. In the fixed mindset, people believe that their ideal partner is someone who will put them on a pedestal.
They want to be worshipped.
Yes, they want a partner who will make them feel flawless, who will agree with them constantly, and who will validate their fixed traits.
It's the Cinderella myth, the idea of instant, effortless compatibility. And if there is friction, it means the relationship is doomed because you believe people can't change.
Exactly. They expect telepathy. They believe a true soulmate should just know what they are thinking without having to communicate.
That sounds exhausting.
And when conflicts inevitably arise, the fixed mindset partner feels betrayed. They view the partner's complaint not as a request for behavioral change, but as an attack on their permanent character.
But people with a growth mindset want a completely different dynamic.
Right. They want a partner who will challenge them.
Yeah.
They want someone who will encourage them to learn new things, who will call them out on their faults in a constructive way, and who views the relationship as a living, breathing entity that requires constant work and communication to evolve.
Which brings us to the danger of how we communicate with the people we lead. If you're listening and you have kids or employees or a partner, you probably want to encourage them. You want to build them up.
Of course.
But what if the way we've been culturally trained to encourage people is actually destroying their potential?
This is perhaps the most actionable part of Dweck's research. The danger of praise and positive labels.
This part really got me.
The vast majority of parents and managers believe that to foster confidence, you must praise a person's inherent ability. You are so smart, you are a natural, you are so talented.
It makes intuitive sense.
It does. But the data reveals a deeply dark side to this practice.
The IQ test praise study is completely mind-blowing. Let's really look at how this went down. Researchers gave early adolescent students a set of moderately difficult nonverbal puzzles.
And everyone did pretty well in the first round.
Right. Then they split the kids into two groups for a single sentence of praise, just one sentence.
And what were the sentences?
Half of the kids were praised for their ability. They were told, wow, you got a really good score. You must be smart at this.
Okay.
The other half were praised for their effort. They were told, wow, you got a really good score. You must have worked really hard.
Now watch how quickly the psychology shifts. The researchers then offer the students a choice for their next task. They can try a challenging new puzzle that they might struggle with but could learn from, or they could choose a safe, easy puzzle they will definitely succeed at.
And the results are just staggering. The students who were praised for their ability overwhelmingly rejected the challenging new task.
Because that one sentence of praise literally pushed them into a fixed mindset. They didn't want to expose their flaws and call their newly minted SMART label into question.
Exactly. Meanwhile, 90% of the effort praised kids eagerly wanted the challenge. They weren't protecting a label. They were engaged in a process.
But it gets much worse. Then the researchers gave all the students some really hard problems where everyone struggled and failed.
To see how they'd react.
Right. The ability-praised kids immediately internalized the failure. They thought, if success meant I was smart, this failure means I am dumb. Their performance plummeted, and they stopped enjoying the puzzles completely.
And the effort-praised kids.
The effort-praised kids just thought they needed to apply a different strategy. They maintained their performance, and many of them actually found the hard puzzles to be their favorite part.
But the most alarming finding, the truly devastating mechanic of what we think of as positive labels, happened at the very end.
Yeah, this part is chilling.
The researchers asked the students to write their scores on a piece of paper to share anonymously with kids at another school.
And what happened?
Almost 40% of the ability-praised students lied about their scores.
They inflated them.
Yes. Telling children they were smart turned almost half of them into liars. Because in the fixed mindset, imperfections are shameful, especially if you're supposed to be talented, so they simply lied the failure out of existence.
Calling someone gifted or brilliant sounds empowering, but it actually puts them on a precarious pedestal that they are absolutely terrified of falling off of.
The story of Adam Guettel in the text perfectly illustrates this terror. He's the grandson of the legendary composer Richard Rodgers of Rodgers and Hammerstein fame.
Talk about big shoes to fill.
From a very young age, Guettel was constantly praised as a genius. He was crowned the savior of musical theater. And what did that immense positive labeling do to him? It nearly destroyed him.
It manifested physically, didn't it?
Yes. He developed obsessive-compulsive tics, he had bleeding, bitten fingers, and he fell into serious drug addiction. He famously articulated the trap, saying, "To be good is to fail." Wait, no, he said, "To be good is to fail. The only thing not a failure is to be great."
That is immense pressure.
When he was 13 years old, he actually faked his voice changing to get out of a high-profile opera broadcast because he simply couldn't handle the crushing pressure of his own perceived potential.
It is a terrible burden. And if positive labels are that destructive by creating impossible pedestals, we must also look at the mechanics of negative labels.
Because society is full of them.
This brings in Claude Steele and Joshua Aronson's crucial research on stereotype threat. We know negative stereotypes exist. Toxic ideas that certain races are less intelligent or that women are inherently bad at math.
Right.
What Steele and Aronson's research shows is that simply checking a demographic box on a test form can trigger that stereotype in a person's mind and drastically lower their test score.
The cognitive mechanics of stereotype threat are fascinating and tragic. It is all about cognitive load.
Explain that a bit more.
When a person from a marginalized group is placed in an evaluative situation and they are reminded of a negative stereotype about their group, it triggers a flood of interfering, anxious thoughts. Their working memory is suddenly hijacked.
So their brain is essentially doing double duty.
Exactly. Instead of using 100% of their cognitive capacity to solve the math problem, a massive percentage of their brain is silently arguing with the stereotype, worrying about confirming it, and trying to suppress anxiety.
The negative label imposes a fixed mindset ceiling on the spot, draining the mental resources required to perform.
I can relate to this so deeply. There's a story in the text that mirrors something painfully familiar to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the author talks about a young girl earning 99s in advanced high school math, being on the math team, loving the challenge, and then getting a teacher, Mr. Hellman, who explicitly, out loud, told the class that girls simply couldn't do math.
That is infuriating.
And the real tragedy of that story isn't just that he believed it. It's that the student, despite all her previous success and data proving otherwise, surrendered to the label. Her grades plummeted, she lost her confidence, and she never took a math class again.
It just shut her down completely.
A fixed mindset label is incredibly stealthy.
Yeah.
Even if you think you are confident, a single authority figure putting a negative label on you can short-circuit your entire trajectory. It happened to me, and it took me years to realize that it wasn't my brain that failed. It was the environment that poisoned my mindset.
How long did it take you to realize that wasn't your fault? That the limitation was imposed on you rather than inherent to you?
Honestly, Until I was in my late 20s.
Wow.
I just carried this narrative that I had hit my wall in math. I thought my brain just wasn't built for calculus. It took reading psychology like this to look back and realize, wait, I didn't hit a wall was dropped in front of me, and I just accepted it.
It highlights how profoundly vulnerable we are when we operate in or are forced into the fixed mindset. It grants a single test or a single teacher's prejudiced opinion the terrifying power to measure and define us forever.
So, after exploring all this, the pedestals of praise, the paralysis of effort, the devastation of failure, we have to ask the ultimate question.
Can we actually change this?
Yes. If someone listening right now realizes they've been living in a fixed mindset for 30 years, if they realize they've been avoiding challenges, hiding their mistakes at work, picking romantic partners who just feed their ego, and secretly feeling like an imposter, is it too late to rewire that?
No, it is absolutely not too late. The most empowering takeaway from all of this research is that mindsets are powerful, but ultimately they're just beliefs.
They aren't permanent.
They are constructs in your mind, and you have the agency to change your mind.
How do you even start?
The simple act of knowing about these two frameworks allows you to catch yourself. When you are faced with a challenge and you hear that internal voice say, "Don't try this, you'll look stupid if you fail," you can consciously pause, pivot, and say to yourself, "I am a novice. I am here to learn." The struggle is the process of acquiring the skill.
Just calling it out.
The growth mindset is always available to you. It just requires conscious activation until it becomes a habit.
So let's summarize the massive paradigm shift we've explored in this deep dive today.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. We've learned that true success isn't about proving you're inherently better or smarter than everyone else. It's about stretching yourself to learn and expand your capacity.
Right. And failure isn't a permanent brand on your identity. It's just raw data for improvement.
Effort isn't a sign of weakness or a lack of talent. It is the actual biological engine of genius.
And crucially, when we interact with others, our praise should be directed at the process, the strategy, the focus, and the grit. Never at the inherent trait. We must praise the verb, not the noun.
Right. So to you, the listener, I want you to think of a time you loved doing something. A hobby, a sport, a puzzle, learning an instrument. Until it got hard and you suddenly felt bored or tired and decided to quit.
We've all done that.
I want you to call it out for what it actually was. That wasn't boredom. That was your fixed mindset stepping in to protect your ego from the vulnerability of struggle. The next time that happens, push through it. When the friction hits, literally picture your brain forming new neural connections.
Embrace the friction. It means you are growing.
We'll leave you with a final thought to mull over. We've talked a lot today about how mindsets affect individuals, but think about the culture of your workplace or your family or your friend group.
This is where it gets really applicable.
Is your company's culture built on a fixed mindset? Is it a place where everyone is terrified of looking dumb in meetings? Where people hide their mistakes to protect their status, and where they secretly hope their coworkers fail so they look better by comparison?
That sounds like a miserable place to work.
It is. Because if mindsets can be contagious, and they are, you have the power to infect your entire environment with a growth mindset starting tomorrow.
Just by leading by example.
You don't need a corporate mandate. You can shift the culture simply by changing how you respond to your very next mistake out loud in front of everyone.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Keep learning, keep stretching, and keep challenging your own assumptions.
See you next time.